I never imagined that a simple note, tucked away in the antique desk I inherited, would be the catalyst for the complete demolition of my carefully constructed life. For years, I had walked through the marble halls of this Bel Air estate, a silent monument to my Uncle Arthur's eccentric genius and, more significantly, my own carefully guarded secrets. The air in the mansion always felt heavy with the scent of old money and even older memories, a subtle perfume of opulence and unspoken truths. My name is Alexander Thorne. On paper, I was the epitome of success: sharp suits, a penthouse office downtown, and a portfolio that would make most Wall Street titans green with envy. My days were a meticulously choreographed ballet of high-stakes deals, philanthropic galas, and fleeting, superficial connections that passed for friendships in my gilded cage. But beneath the polished veneer, a persistent hum of anxiety resonated, a discordant note in the symphony of my perfect life. I had built this empire, or rather, expanded upon the vast fortune Uncle Arthur had left me, always with a nagging awareness of the shaky foundation it rested upon. My world, as I knew it, was a perfectly ordered universe. Mornings began with a panoramic view of Los Angeles from my bedroom window, followed by a bespoke espresso and the latest market reports. My staff, a small army of dedicated professionals, ensured every whim was anticipated, every detail managed. This included the continuous rotation of housekeepers, a necessary evil, in my opinion. They moved like ghosts through the expansive rooms, dusting priceless antiques, polishing floors that gleamed like mirrors, and generally maintaining the illusion of effortless perfection. It was a recent hire, Elena, who would unwittingly become the seismic event in my carefully calibrated existence. She was new to the estate, replacing old Mrs. Gable, who'd finally retired after 30 years of quiet, unquestioning service. Elena was different, younger, perhaps in her late 20s or early 30s, with dark, watchful eyes that seemed to take in more than she let on. She was quiet, almost unnervingly so, and moved with a methodical grace that bordered on unsettling. Her presence, subtle as it was, introduced a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor into the rigid structure of my days. I remember the first time I truly noticed her. I was on a conference call in the study, a room I rarely used, but which held a particular significance as Uncle Arthur's favorite retreat. He was a man of routines, and that desk, a colossal piece of mahogany with intricate carvings, was his sanctuary. Elena was meticulously dusting the bookshelves, her back to me, humming a soft, unfamiliar tune. I found myself watching her, not out of admiration, but a strange, unsettling curiosity. She wasn't like the others, who often seemed to defer, almost cower in my presence. Eleanor carried herself with a quiet dignity, a self-possession that bordered on defiance. It was a fleeting observation, lost quickly in the labyrinth of my financial dealings, but it lingered, a faint echo in the otherwise silent chambers of my mind. Later that day, I found a small antique porcelain thimble, a relic from my grandmother, placed perfectly back on a small silver tray on the desk. I had moved it days ago, carelessly leaving it on a pile of papers. Elena had noticed. She had restored order where I had created chaos. It was a small detail, but it pricked at the edges of my controlled environment, a subtle reminder that another pair of eyes was observing, arranging, perhaps even judging. The subtle disruption of Elena's presence escalated into a more visceral discomfort. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find her speaking rapidly into her cell phone, her voice hushed, infused with an unmistakable urgency. She switched to Spanish, a torrent of words I couldn't understand, but the emotion was clear: distress, perhaps even despair. Her brow was furrowed, her free hand clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and she quickly ended the call, mumbling an apology in heavily accented English about a family emergency. The air between us became thick with unspoken tension, a palpable cloud of unease. I dismissed her with a wave of my hand, but her hurried retreat left me with a knot in my stomach. Was she in trouble, or was I just projecting my own anxieties onto an innocent domestic scene? My mind, always attuned to threats and vulnerabilities, immediately leaped to the worst conclusion. Could she be a plant? Was she casing the place? Or was her desperation a vulnerability I could exploit, or worse, one that someone else might? The thought was unsettling. My paranoia, a constant companion since Arthur's death, tightened its grip. The mansion, once my fortress, began to feel like a glass house. I tried to shake off the feeling, to rationalize it away as the consequence of too many late nights and too much caffeine. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I found myself watching Eleanor more closely, observing her movements, her interactions with other staff. She remained professional, meticulous, almost robotic in her efficiency. Yet there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite place. Was it sadness, resignation, or something far more dangerous? My thoughts frequently drifted back to Uncle Arthur and the circumstances surrounding his will. He had been a recluse, a brilliant but troubled man who accumulated his vast fortune through a combination of ruthless business acumen and questionable ethics. He had no other living relatives, no children, no close friends. I was his sole heir, a fact that had always raised eyebrows given our somewhat distant relationship. There were whispers, of course, after his sudden passing, rumors of a contested will, of hidden assets, of shadows lurking in the corners of his vast financial empire. I had dismissed them, of course, as the envious ramblings of a society that couldn't comprehend such immense wealth being bequeathed to a distant nephew. But the truth was, I knew better. I knew the fragile thread by which my inheritance hung, the single devastating secret that could unravel everything. My own early life had been far from the gilded existence I now led. I grew up in a modest home in upstate New York, far removed from the glitz and glamour of Los Angeles. My parents were hard-working, middle-class people who instilled in me a fierce ambition and a desire to escape the confines of their quiet lives. I was driven, ruthless in my pursuit of success, a trait Arthur had recognized and perhaps even admired. He had taken me under his wing in my early 20s, a mentorship that was as much an education in corporate warfare as it was a crash course in the Machiavellian intricacies of high finance. He saw in me a younger, more malleable version of himself, someone who wouldn't flinch from making difficult choices, and I didn't. Not then, and not when the moment came that forever altered the trajectory of my life and cemented my place as his heir. The memory still haunted me, a cold metallic taste in my mouth, a phantom ache in my chest. It was a decision made under duress, a moral compromise disguised as a necessary evil, justified by the promise of untold riches. And now, as Elena moved silently through my ostentatious home, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed facade was cracking, threatening to reveal the ugliness beneath. The thimble on the desk, the hurried Spanish conversation, the watchful eyes, all were micro-triggers, subtle reminders that the world I inhabited was not as secure as I desperately needed it to be. The grand estate, once a symbol of my triumph, was slowly beginning to feel like a trap, and I, the architect of my own fortune, was now its prisoner. The phantom ache in my chest persisted, a dull throb that resonated with the silence of the vast, empty rooms. Uncle Arthur's will, when it was finally read, had been a theatrical performance, as everything with him tended to be. It was a complex, multi-layered document filled with obscure clauses and riddles, typical of a man who delighted in intellectual games. My inheritance wasn't just a transfer of assets, it was a challenge, a test of my shrewdness, my resolve, and my willingness to keep a very particular secret. The moral problem, which had festered beneath the surface of my consciousness for years, was directly tied to a specific stipulation in that will. A hidden condition that I alone knew about, one that ensured my control over the entire fortune, but at a severe ethical cost. It involved a distant cousin, a man named Thomas Sterling, whom Arthur had unjustly disinherited years ago due to a petty family squabble. The original will, the one Arthur had drafted before his sudden illness, had left a substantial portion to Thomas. But Arthur, in a fit of pique just weeks before he died, had drafted a codicil, a single devastating paragraph that effectively erased Thomas from his life and legacy. He had then entrusted me, personally, with the task of destroying the previous will, ensuring only the final, harsher version would stand. It was a cruel act, a final display of Arthur's tyrannical control, and I, eager for the main prize, had complied without hesitation. I burned the old will, watching the paper curl and blacken, along with a part of my conscience. Eleanor continued her work, her presence a constant low-frequency hum of potential disruption. She was exceptionally thorough, a quality I usually appreciated. But today, it felt like an invasion. She was dusting the study again, specifically the heavy mahogany desk that had been Arthur's command center. The desk, with its ornate carvings and countless drawers, had always been a source of fascination and fear for me. I knew its secrets, or so I thought. I watched her from the doorway, nursing a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid doing little to calm my frayed nerves. She ran her hand over the smooth, dark wood, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. Then she paused, her gaze fixed on a section of the desk near the back, almost hidden by a decorative panel. My breath hitched. I knew that spot. It was where Arthur had kept a small, spring-loaded compartment, a cunningly concealed drawer that he rarely used, and whose existence I believed only he and I knew. Elena's fingers lingered, then pressed. With a soft click, the panel receded slightly, revealing a narrow, shallow recess. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had she known, or was it merely an accident, the touch of a careful hand revealing a forgotten mechanism? She peered into the opening, her expression unreadable. Inside, there was nothing but a thin layer of dust, and nestled at the very back, a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It was Arthur's. I recognized the embossed initials. My blood ran cold. This wasn't the hidden letter yet, but it was a crucial stepping stone. It was enough to throw my meticulously balanced world into disarray. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal fear seizing me. My first instinct was to stride in, snatch the journal and confront her, to erase the moment as if it had never happened. But something held me back. Her quiet demeanor, her seemingly innocent curiosity, made me hesitate. What if I was wrong? What if it was nothing? My carefully constructed facade of control was already showing hairline fractures. I retreated silently before she could see me. The journal in her hand, even if she didn't understand its significance yet, was a ticking time bomb. I knew Arthur kept meticulous records, not just of his finances, but of his life, his thoughts, his grievances. And if that journal contained any reference to the original will, or to Thomas Sterling, or, God forbid, to my role in its destruction, then everything would be lost. I spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated paranoia, watching the clock, listening for any unusual sounds. Elena finished her shift without incident, the journal presumably put back or hidden. I couldn't be sure. I didn't dare ask. The thought of confronting her, of revealing that I knew what she had found, felt like an admission of guilt I wasn't prepared to make. Later that evening, after she had left, I crept back into the study. The secret compartment was closed, the desk looking as pristine as ever. I opened it myself, my fingers trembling slightly. The journal was gone. The cold dread that had been lurking beneath the surface now solidified into a block of ice in my stomach. The next few days were a blur of heightened anxiety. My business dealings, usually my sharpest focus, seemed distant, unimportant. All my attention was consumed by Elena. I observed her, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity. She continued her duties, quiet and efficient, but now I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a certain thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. Had she read the journal? Did she understand its implications? Every casual glance, every fleeting interaction felt charged with unspoken meaning. I found myself scrutinizing her even more, trying to discern if she showed any signs of panic or triumph, or even just confusion. Nothing. She was a master of self-control, or perhaps she genuinely didn't comprehend the magnitude of what she had stumbled upon. But the journal's disappearance confirmed my deepest fears. It was not just an old keepsake, it was a potential weapon. I couldn't sleep. The mansion, usually a sanctuary of silence, now echoed with the drumming of my own heart. I remembered the conversation I had with Arthur shortly before his death. He had been gravely ill, his mind clouded by pain medication, yet moments of lucidity would cut through like shards of glass. "Alexander," he'd rasped, his voice barely a whisper, "the truly great fortunes aren't built on honesty. They're built on the secrets you keep, and the ones you bury." He'd smiled, a macabre twist of his lips. "But even the deepest grave has a way of giving up its dead." He was referring to the original will, the one I had burned. He knew I had done it, even as he gave me the instruction. It was a test, a final lesson in ruthlessness, and I had passed with flying colors. Or so I thought. Elena's phone calls, always discreet, became a recurring source of my torment. I'd catch snippets, a worried tone, a quick switch to Spanish. Was she talking to someone about the journal? Was she seeking advice? My paranoia reached a fever pitch. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the living room, I noticed her leave her purse on the ornate console table near the entrance. It was a simple, practical canvas bag, nothing like the designer purses my usual social circle carried. An impulse, dark and irresistible, seized me. I waited until she was out of sight in the dining room, then I moved. My hands trembled as I opened the clasp. Inside, nestled among a wallet, a worn lipstick, and a crumpled tissue, was the leather-bound journal. But it wasn't just the journal. Tucked inside its pages, almost perfectly concealed, was a single, folded piece of parchment. It was aged, the ink faded, but the elegant script was unmistakable. Arthur's handwriting. My eyes scanned the first few lines, my blood turning to ice. "To my dear nephew, Alexander, should you ever find this, know that I confess my error and wish to right a great injustice." This was it, the hidden letter. Not a confession to me, but a confession about me, about the wrongful disinheritance of Thomas Sterling, about Arthur's deep regret, and about the original will that should have stood. It outlined Arthur's final, desperate attempt to rectify his wrong, stating that he intended for Thomas to inherit a significant portion, a fact that would completely invalidate my claim to the bulk of the estate if this letter ever came to light. It was a deathbed confession, meant to be found, a moral counterweight to his earlier cruelty and my own complicity. I carefully refolded the letter and placed it back within the journal, then returned the journal to Elena's purse, my movements precise, mechanical. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a secret. It was a confession from the grave, a posthumous accusation. Arthur, in his final moments, had sought redemption, and I, in my greed, had unknowingly become the obstacle. Elena had found not just the journal, but the irrefutable evidence of my moral failings, of the lie upon which my entire fortune was built. My carefully constructed life wasn't just cracking. It was on the verge of spectacular collapse. A profound sense of dread settled over me, heavier than any financial loss. It wasn't just money I stood to lose, it was my entire identity, my carefully cultivated image, my very freedom. The silence of the mansion now felt less like peace and more like the stifling quiet before a storm. I could almost hear the rustling of the pages, the faint whisper of Arthur's voice, accusing me from beyond the grave. The direct interaction I craved, the confrontation with Elena, felt like a dangerous precipice. What if it were you, reading that letter, holding the key to someone's downfall, but also to your own family's salvation? Would you have been brave enough to do the same? The question echoed in the cavernous space of my mind, demanding an answer I wasn't prepared to give. The weight of the hidden letter became an unbearable burden, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me with its unspoken accusations. My carefully controlled world, once a fortress, now felt like a prison. The luxury around me, the silk carpets, the priceless artwork, the panoramic views, all seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I watched Elena with an intensity that bordered on obsession, searching for any sign that she understood the explosive potential of what she possessed. She remained impassive, a quiet storm of uncertainty. I knew I had to act to neutralize the threat before it detonated. My mind, trained in the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers, immediately began to formulate a strategy. The simplest solution, the most effective, was to buy her silence. Money. It always worked. It was my most powerful weapon, the lubricant that smoothed over all ethical wrinkles. I called her into my study one afternoon, the same room where the letter had been discovered. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The mahogany desk between us, a silent witness. Elena stood opposite me, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze steady but reserved. "Elena," I began, my voice calm, controlled. "You've been doing exceptional work. Your attention to detail is truly remarkable." She nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of her head. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." "I appreciate your discretion," I continued, emphasizing the word, letting it hang in the air between us like a threat. "And your loyalty." I paused, letting the implication sink in. "I understand you're facing some personal challenges, family matters, I believe." Her eyes flickered, a momentary tremor of emotion in their depths. "Yes, sir. My mother is ill, and my younger brother, he needs help with his college tuition." She spoke with a quiet dignity, no hint of asking for charity, just stating facts. "I see," I said, a plan forming fully in my mind. "Well, I believe in rewarding hard work and loyalty. I'm prepared to offer you a substantial raise, effective immediately, and as a gesture of appreciation, I'd like to help with your family's situation. I'll arrange for a significant bonus, enough to cover your mother's medical bills and your brother's first year of college. Consider it a long-term commitment, a partnership, if you will." I watched her reaction closely. Her eyes widened slightly, a flash of surprise, then caution. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. The offer was generous, beyond anything a housekeeper could dream of. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the desperate need clashing with something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. For a moment, I believed I had solved the situation. This was my false exit, my clever maneuver to sidestep the moral abyss. I was offering her a lifeline, a way out of her own struggles, in exchange for her silence. It was a transaction, pure and simple, and in my world, transactions always closed. "Mr. Thorne," she finally said, her voice soft, "that is incredibly generous. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," I interjected, a slight edge to my voice. "Just accept and continue your excellent work." I watched her, a knot of unease still twisting in my stomach. She seemed to consider it, the sheer magnitude of the offer weighing on her. Her family's needs were profound. This money could change their lives. I saw the conflict etched on her face, a silent battle between necessity and conscience. I need to think about it, Mr. Thorne," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. My composure faltered for a fraction of a second. No one ever thought about such an offer. They grasped it with both hands. This was not going according to plan. This was not a simple transaction. I dismissed her, the silence that followed her departure more oppressive than before. My false sense of security evaporated, replaced by a growing dread. Elena's hesitation, her unspoken reservation, confirmed my worst fears. She knew. She wasn't just a struggling housekeeper. She was a woman holding a powerful card, and she wasn't easily bought. I paced the study, my mind racing, dissecting her reaction, searching for clues. Had I misjudged her? Was she genuinely conflicted? Or was this a tactic, a way to extract an even higher price? The thought made my blood boil. How dare she? I, who held her future in my hands, was now at her mercy. The tables subtly were turning. My financial advisor, a man named Robert, called me later that week, his tone unusually grave. "Alexander," he said, "I've received a rather unusual inquiry from a firm specializing in estate litigation. They're asking some very specific questions about the Sterling estate and Arthur's will. Apparently, they represent a disgruntled relative." My stomach plummeted. Thomas Sterling. My blood ran cold. The letter, Elena. It was all connected. Robert, ever the professional, tried to reassure me. "It's probably nothing, Alexander. Happens all the time with large estates, just fishing expeditions." But his voice lacked conviction, and I knew better. This wasn't a fishing expedition. This was a targeted strike. Elena had made her move. I felt a surge of cold fury, a potent cocktail of betrayal and fear. She had chosen conscience over comfort, justice over the easy path. She had called my bluff, and now the house of cards I had so meticulously built was swaying precariously. My carefully crafted illusion of control was crumbling, brick by brick. The irony was not lost on me. I, the master manipulator, was now the one being played, and the game had only just begun. The phone call from Robert was a dagger to my carefully constructed peace. The fishing expedition was real, and it wasn't just some random lawyer. It was a firm known for its aggressive pursuit of estate fraud. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Elena hadn't just hesitated. She had rejected my offer, not out of greed for more, but out of a profound sense of justice. She had chosen to act, to reveal the truth that Uncle Arthur had tucked away and that I had sought to bury. The roles had indeed reversed. I was no longer the all-powerful benefactor. I was the potential target, a man exposed. The grand estate, once a symbol of my impenetrable power, now felt like a stage for my public undoing. Days turned into a suffocating blur of anxiety and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat, every phone call a harbinger of doom. I dismissed Elena, not with anger, but with a forced, icy calm. She simply nodded, gathered her few belongings, and left, her quiet dignity unwavering. Her departure left a gaping hole in the mansion, a strange void that underscored my growing isolation. The other staff members noticed, of course, the sudden, unexplained dismissal of the diligent housekeeper. Whispers followed me through the halls, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when I approached. I was a pariah in my own home, haunted by the ghost of a secret unearthed. The first official notification arrived in the mail, a registered letter from the law firm informing me of an impending investigation into the validity of Uncle Arthur's last will and testament, citing newly discovered evidence. Newly discovered evidence. Those words echoed in my mind, a mocking refrain. I knew exactly what that evidence was. Elena hadn't just delivered the journal and the letter, she had delivered my fate. I hired the best legal team money could buy, a phalanx of shrewd, expensive lawyers who specialized in protecting the wealthy from their own misdeeds. They were efficient, ruthless, and entirely focused on preserving my assets, not my conscience. But even they couldn't conjure away the truth contained within Arthur's final confession. The letter was a direct, unambiguous statement of his regret, his intent to restore Thomas Sterling's inheritance, and my own knowledge of this intent. It was damning. I tried to fight back, to discredit Elena, to paint her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge or a payout. My lawyers explored every avenue, every loophole, every possible angle. But the letter was undeniable. Its authenticity, Arthur's distinctive handwriting, the detailed account of his change of heart. It was all there, meticulously documented. The story began to leak to the press. sensationalized headlines blaring about a billionaire's hidden will and a housekeeper's courageous discovery. My name, once synonymous with financial prowess, was now associated with deceit and scandal. My carefully cultivated reputation, built on years of strategic philanthropy and carefully managed public appearances, crumbled in a matter of days. Business partners distanced themselves, deals evaporated, and my phone, once a constant source of opportunity, now rang only with the insistent calls of journalists and angry investors. I found myself alone in the vastness of the mansion, the silence deafening. The irony was suffocating. I had everything money could buy, yet I possessed nothing of true value. My pride, my carefully constructed facade of invincibility, lay shattered around me. I remembered Elena's face, her quiet resolve, the way she had looked at me when I offered her the money. There was no judgment then, just a profound sense of internal conflict. She had made her choice, not for personal gain, but for what she believed was right. And in doing so, she had revealed my own deep-seated flaws, my willingness to sacrifice morality for ambition. Have you also lost someone to pride? The question resonated with an agonizing clarity. I had lost more than just Elena. I had lost the last vestiges of my own integrity, sacrificed at the altar of inherited wealth. The truth, like a persistent weed, had finally pushed through the concrete of my denials. The legal battle that ensued was a protracted, agonizing public spectacle. Every detail of Arthur's life and mine was laid bare for the world to dissect. The media feasted on the story, painting me as the villain, Elena as the unlikely heroine. Thomas Sterling, a mild-mannered history professor I barely knew, was thrust into the spotlight, his quiet life upended by the belated justice of his great-uncle's final confession. The irony of it all was almost too much to bear. I had spent my entire adult life meticulously building an empire, only to have it unravel because of a single piece of paper and the unwavering conscience of a woman I had dismissed as inconsequential. I sat through endless depositions, my lawyers fighting tooth and nail, but the evidence was overwhelming. The journal, the letter, the testimony from handwriting experts, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. Arthur had intended to rectify his injustice, and I had knowingly prevented it. My moral compass, long dormant, now spun wildly, pointing accusatorily at myself. In the quiet, desolate hours of the night, when the mansion was truly silent, I would often wander back into the study, to the mahogany desk. I would trace the outline of the hidden compartment, a monument to a truth I had desperately tried to keep buried. It was a strange kind of epiphany that began to bloom in the ashes of my ruined life. I remembered Arthur's words, "The truly great fortunes aren't built on honesty, they're built on the secrets you keep." He had been right, in a way. My fortune was built on a secret, a lie, but it was also crumbling because of it. The solitude of my predicament forced a brutal introspection. I saw myself not as the astute businessman, the philanthropic leader, but as a hollow shell, driven by avarice and fear. My ambition had blinded me to the profound human cost of my choices. The wealth I possessed, once a source of pride, now felt like a heavy, corrosive chain. One particularly bleak evening, I found myself replaying the conversation with Arthur on his deathbed. His words, slurred by pain, had been a twisted prophecy. He had tested my ruthlessness, and I had proven him right. But he had also, in his final moments, sought a kind of redemption, leaving behind a breadcrumb trail for justice, hoping someone would follow it. Elena had been that someone. The old man, in his dying breath, had managed to outmaneuver me, his greedy nephew. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also, strangely, a revelation. The hidden theme of Arthur's life, and now mine, was the suffocating solitude that comes with immense ill-gotten success and the corrosive effect of secrets. My life, once seemingly so full, was now utterly empty. The grand rooms, once filled with the hushed sounds of staff and the superficial chatter of guests, now echoed with the silence of my own guilt. I had traded my conscience for a kingdom, and now that kingdom was being stripped away, piece by painful piece. I thought of Thomas Sterling, the quiet professor whose life had been unjustly deprived of a fortune he was entitled to, and I thought of Elena, the woman who, with a simple act of honesty, had brought my elaborate deception crashing down. Her courage, born of her own struggles and a steadfast moral core, stood in stark contrast to my own moral bankruptcy. The mansion itself felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum, a monument to a life built on sand, crumbling with every wave of truth. The police would arrive soon. I knew it. The climax was not a question of if, but when. And for the first time in years, the crushing weight of impending loss was accompanied by a strange, unsettling sense of inevitability, perhaps even a twisted form of relief. The truth, at last, was coming for me. The flashing blue and red lights painted an eerie, kaleidoscopic glow across the perfectly manicured lawns of the mansion. Sirens, distant at first, grew louder, wailing their grim song through the crisp night air. It was over. The climax wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing descent into an inescapable reality. I watched from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room as a fleet of police cruisers and unmarked vehicles pulled up the winding driveway. My legal team had prepared me for this moment, but no amount of preparation could truly ready one for the sound of authority hammering at your door. The heavy oak doors, once a symbol of my impenetrable privacy, now seemed flimsy, brittle. They didn't break it down, of course. My head of security, a burly ex-cop named Frank, opened it, his face grim. Uniformed officers, followed by men in suits who I recognized as investigators from the district attorney's office, flooded the foyer. Their faces were stern, their movements efficient. They had search warrants, arrest warrants. The words were a muffled drone in my ears, background noise to the frantic pounding of my own heart. This wasn't a movie. It was my life, and the credits were rolling far earlier than I had ever anticipated. "Mr. Alexander Thorne?" one of the investigators asked, his voice calm but firm. I simply nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt constricted, my mouth dry. They read me my rights, the familiar words of due process echoing with a chilling irony in the grand, silent hall. My hands were cuffed behind my back, the cold metal a stark contrast to the custom-tailored suit I was wearing. The shame was a burning inferno in my chest, more painful than any physical restraint. As they led me out, past the priceless artwork, the gleaming marble, and the hushed, bewildered staff, I caught a glimpse of myself in a gilded mirror. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, stripped bare of all the calculated charm and ruthless ambition that had defined me for so long. I looked like a ghost, a spectre of the man I once was, or perhaps a truer reflection of the man I had always been. The finality of the moment was crushing. The grand estate, which had been both my sanctuary and my prison, was now a crime scene. My world had shattered, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. Justice, or at least a version of it, had finally arrived. Uncle Arthur's last desperate act of redemption, brought to light by Eleanor's quiet integrity, had finally found its target. I lost everything, of course. The vast fortune was largely redirected to Thomas Sterling, as Arthur's letter had intended. My reputation was irrevocably destroyed, my name synonymous with scandal and deceit. I faced a lengthy legal battle, the outcome of which seemed bleak. But in the strange, bewildering aftermath of my downfall, a sliver of something unexpected emerged, a peculiar sense of release. The burden of the secret, the crushing weight of the lie, was finally lifted. The constant paranoia, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety, all of it was gone, replaced by an unsettling, almost peaceful emptiness. I never saw Eleanor again. I don't know what became of her, if her family found the peace and financial stability she fought for. I hope they did. She didn't seek fame or fortune from my downfall. She sought justice, a truth beyond the reach of money. As I was driven away, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror, bathed in the pulsating lights of the police cars, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The account balance was no longer intact, but perhaps, for the first time in a very long time, my heart held a fragile chance at something resembling peace. It was a peace bought at an extraordinary cost, a price I had paid with my entire life. Tell me, what would you have done?